Well, good afternoon, everybody. Hello, my name is Garrett Schmidt. I'm the managing editor for VBC Exhibit Hall. So I wanted to thank you and welcome you to today's live webinar hosted by DataLink, and it is called The Red and Green Flags of Value-Based Care Contracts, Uncovering Key Components and Avoiding Pitfalls for Success. This is going to be a really great presentation. I had a little sneak peek of it during some of our practice runs, so I think you're really going to enjoy what our speakers have to say today. A few items of note before we get started. This is a traditional webinar format, so everyone is joined today in listen-only mode. So don't worry about it. We can't see you, we can't hear you, but we do want to hear from you. So we are going to have a time for some Q&A towards the end of the session. So at any time during the presentation, feel free to contribute a question using your control module. So there's an area for chat, but actually there's a specific area for questions. So if you drop your questions there, we're going to get to as many as we can. If for some reason we don't get to yours, don't worry, someone will respond via email later on and get your question answered. And then finally, today's session is being recorded. So what's going to happen is about maybe an hour after the presentation concluded, you will receive an email and it'll have a link to the recording, to the slide set, and so you can review it, you can share it with colleagues. We hope that you do. Yeah, please share it with anyone that you feel would be interested. And without further ado, I wanted to introduce our speakers today. First, we have Ms. Kelly Kolop, and she is the manager of the BBC team with DataLink. So welcome, Kelly. And we also have Mr. Logan Steele. He is the COO of Primary Care Centers. So welcome, both of you. I believe, Kelly, you're going to get us kicked off. So
Thank you. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us on the webinar today. Before we get started, we wanted to give you a little bit of background on our experience with BBC contracting. So I'm going to go ahead and get started first. Prior to joining DataLink, I worked for a provider organization that was a clinically integrated network, and I assisted with BBC contract negotiations. I oversaw the contract performance and incentive payouts. There were about 500 providers in our network, and we had both employed and independent physicians in our network, and our BBC contracts were primarily shared savings contracts. So Logan?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I currently work for Physician Care Centers, which is a risk-bearing primary care practice, as the Chief of Operations. Today, we operate in about 5 states and have 100,000 lives in various value-based care contracting instances. I participate in everything from quality, HEDIS, to revenue cycle management and clinic operations.
Thanks, Logan. All right, so as you may know, BBC contract terms highly contribute to the potential success of the contract. So today we're going to take a deeper dive into a few of the components that we believe deserve a thorough review. The objectives today are to discuss BBC contract components that you can't ignore, review pitfalls to avoid, and then provide real-world strategies to implement into your contracting process. And before we get started, we're going to do a polling question, so I'm going to send it over to Garrett for that.
Okay. Yes, so you can see the polling question on the screen there, but I'm about to put it up here. And this is what BBC contracts do you participate in? And this is a select all that apply. So I have just launched that. So you should see that on your screen if you can vote. This is anonymous. So what we'll do is we'll share the results here too. And so you'll be able to see kind of where you stack among your colleagues. Of course, the answers here are pay for performance, shared savings upside only, shared savings upside and downside risk, partial or fully capitated, or none of the above does not apply. So we've still got some replies and results coming in. So we're going to give this a few more seconds here. Okay. Still have results coming in. And I think most of them have come in, so we're going to shut it down in about 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, and I'm going to close this out. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and share the results. So Kelly and Logan, are you able to see the results here?
Yes, just taking that in. So it looks like we have a broad spectrum of people on the call who have all kinds of different levels of experience with BBC contracts. So that's really encouraging. Logan, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, I think it's definitely interesting to see kind of the, the distribution of current individuals on the call today, where some of them are actually participating in the downside risk with right about 62%, but overwhelmingly, there is not a whole lot of downside risk there. So it's interesting to see where everyone is on their value-based care journey.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that with us.
Okay.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about reconciliation terms. So I joke that we're starting where contracts end is at reconciliation. So reconciliation terms address when and how the contract will be reconciled. Contracts can be reconciled monthly, quarterly, or annually, and more frequent reconciliations will add to a group's cash flow. So it can also lead to the repayment of funds when there is an overpayment or a deficit. So in my experience, most of our contracts were settled annually, but we even had all of our contracts were actually settled annually, but we had one contract that had a quarterly reconciliation, and we paid our incentives to our providers annually. So for that one contract that had the quarterly reconciliations, we often did not pay those payments out to our providers until the contract was fully settled. So it's just something to keep in mind. There are tax implications to holding over those funds into a new year. So just be sure to consider how you'll handle those payments and get advice from a trusted tax consultant. Negotiate the terms that work best for you in the contract. And then for claims run out, just keep in mind that claims run out periods are usually 6 to 9 months. So settlements may occur 9 months after the performance year. And that can lead to a delay in shared savings payments and the rewards that you share with your providers. And if you have downside risk, you'll also want to keep in mind that you may have to pay shared losses back to the payer 6 to 9 months after the performance year as well. And most contracts will typically provide a settlement date, and it'll state that the settlement should occur on or before that date. The contract will also include dispute resolution terms, and that often gives a deadline for filing the dispute, or a certain number of days that you have to file the dispute after settlement. So in my experience, we went through a dispute resolution process at the provider organization. We disputed how PIP regulations were applied to our shared savings payment, and this resulted in a significant amount of additional shared savings for our organization. And if I hadn't reviewed the contract reconciliation and submitted the dispute within the given time frame, we wouldn't have had any recourse to those funds. So it's just really important to stay on top of those dates. Logan, what is your experience with reconciliation terms?
Yeah, we prefer for, and push for a more frequent reconciliation, just because it allows us to receive, more cash flow on a monthly or quarterly basis. Because we are in majority a staff model business, a lot of the additional cash flow goes back into care coordination programs and wraparound services that we actually provide in our locations. I think it's definitely, a really important point to note that if you're reconciling monthly or quarterly, how you pay your downstream providers, if you're in more of an affiliate or MSO type model, definitely has implications, because you don't want to be in a position where you overpay one quarter and now you're subject to some type of clawback. It just can make the relationship a little bit abrasive.
Yeah, thanks, Logan. All right, well, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. We'll talk about patient attribution. So depending on the plan, patients may select their PCP, or they may be assigned using a plurality of primary care services logic, or sometimes a combination of both. Attribution logic will be defined in the contract and may include attribution to specialty providers like oncologists and OBGYNs. Attribution may be retrospective, so that's going to be looking at services in the current year, or it could be prospective, looking at services in the prior year. So contract terms often stipulate that an organization also maintains a specific panel size, which can be a challenge if your panel is near the threshold. And we had that experience at the organization that I was with. we had a contract that stated that we would not receive shared savings payment if our panel size fell below 1,000 patients. And we were very close to that threshold. And it was really kind of a challenge for us to manage that contract and really to focus on it as well, because we knew that at any point in time we might fall out of that shared savings potential. So the following year, we were able to get the payer to agree that once we hit the threshold of 1,000 patients at any point in the performance year, that we were then locked into that shared savings potential. Okay, let's talk about baseline dates. Baseline dates are often used to establish the population of patients that can be attributed to quality measures. So the panel of patients on a given set date are determined to be the baseline for those measures. And then any patients that join the plan after the date will not fall into the measures for that measurement year. And that's often can be really beneficial for the provider organization so that they don't have to worry about patients coming in at the end of the year and not being able to kind of get them in and get them out for preventative screenings and things like that. And attribution disputes, I would ensure that your contract addresses how attribution disputes are handled. So, for example, if you have a patient or a patient panel that you believe should not be attributed to your organization, how will you submit a request to have them removed from your attribution? Keep in mind that contracts may have a deadline as well for those submissions. So, Logan, what are some of your thoughts that you have on attribution?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be thoughtful when you're creating kind of your initial panel size requirements. You know, with too little of a panel, you can have some adverse risk and be in kind of a deficit situation before you really even get started. And with an unattainable membership threshold, you may leave substantial financial opportunities on the table, you know, for one or two members short. So I think it's definitely important to think about where you will end up realistically for the lifetime of the contract.
Thanks, Logan. All right, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is data sharing. So data sharing is a key component of VBC contract management. Payers that participate in Medicare or Medicaid contracts, they often need to collect data beyond claims to satisfy federal and state reporting requirements. So an example of this is risk adjustment data. So payers may ask the provider group to share quality, risk, and utilization information through flat files, CCDs, or even request remote EMR access for medical records. But likewise, for providers, payers will usually provide quality and utilization data as well. And as providers take on more risk or even get into shared savings contracts, claims data is shared. So in my experience, we had, I mentioned earlier, mostly shared savings contracts, and we were offered claims often for those contracts, but usually it was with providers within our network. So as we started to kind of become more sophisticated with those contracts, we started to ask for the full picture, all of the claims. And we just felt like it was really essential in order to manage our utilization and cost, and also just to model for performance in future downside risk contracts. So contracts should address what data will be provided and then the frequency that it will be shared. Monthly reporting is really common and I think very beneficial. So Logan, what have you found to be some important aspects of data sharing?
Yeah, we really push to have 2 years of financial history on our patient panel in terms of claims, premium, kind of everything that comes in that monthly bundle. But I think it's important to note that with big data kind of comes big responsibility, and having the ability to kind of wrap your rounds around that data on a monthly basis can be challenging. It's important to designate a team internally or have a vendor that you can trust to kind of gatekeep the data. I think it's important to not only look at the individual patient, but trend the population as a whole to ultimately form conclusions and build programs to meet the specifications of your individual patients.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I know that when I was at the provider organization, we received data files through various FTP sites, and we were having to go in and download those. And for any organization that's kind of lacking staff or skills or technology to fully utilize that data, it's worthwhile to talk to the payer about what type of tools that they will provide as well, or if there's any assistance that they will be able to provide for you to have an internal population health technology. So we're going to go ahead and now do another polling question. I'm going to send this over to Garrett.
Okay. So we're going to launch this next one. It's how are you currently managing payer data? And it should be on your screen. This is a select one. Again, these are all anonymous, so you'll be able to see kind of where you sit among your colleagues. First is internal or team technology. I'm sorry, internal team or technology. Third-party vendor, a combination of both internal team technology and a third-party vendor. We receive data, but we don't manage it, or not currently receiving data. So we'll give, looks like the results are coming in pretty strong. So we'll give it another few seconds. Again, how are you currently managing payer data? So I think most of the submissions are in by now. We'll give it a few more seconds here, and I'll shut it down in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And I'm going to go ahead and close it out now, and I'll share the results. All right. Are you guys able to see the results?
I am. I'm just looking over this. So this is interesting. So what do you think, Logan? I mean, almost half have internal teams and technology to manage data. And so I can definitely see that for those who are kind of taking on some additional like downside risk or capitated contracts. And then there's some that have a combination of both about that same. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's been a really big trend overall in having, healthcare services has really migrated into, making sure that you have the capabilities internally from a technology perspective. I think that's where we see some of the larger and more sophisticated, really successful MSOs and managed care entities win, is being able to wrangle the data and turn it into something that's actionable. I think it's really promising to see that a lot of folks have internal teams and technology that they're utilizing kind of, on a daily basis. But there are, some folks that are not receiving the data, or they do receive it and they don't really know how to manage it. So I think there is a wide spectrum of individuals and practices and groups in this space. And I think as the common trend leans more towards, having really robust technology, we'll start to see kind of the entire population start to migrate towards probably a combination of both, just because of how many vendors and portals there are.
Yeah, I agree. I think we will see kind of a combination of both. All right, well, thank you for sharing that information with us. All right. So for financial considerations, if you're in a shared savings or a risk contract, I really can't stress enough how important it is to fully review the contract language and address what is included in plan revenue and also in cost. So this should be clearly defined in the contract. Some components of revenue may include government PMPM payments, member premiums, and if you're participating in payer reinsurance programs, you would possibly see the reinsurance payments there as well. And then for costs, you'll see claims, any fees that you pay for reinsurance, and then prescription drug rebates will be credited under costs as well. So one thing that came as a surprise to me when I first started working with BBC contracts was kind of seeing that payer provided services or vendor fees were included in our cost. And so in this example, we had a payer that offered care management services to our attributed patients. And the fees for those services were a line item under our cost. It seems like this is pretty common now, practice, but just be sure to review the language of the contract and understand what services and vendor fees will be included and that you agree. And then for carve-outs here, I'm referencing this in reference to any components of healthcare costs that is excluded from shared savings or capitated arrangements. So these are often like high areas of spend, and examples of this are Part D, oncology claims, or gene therapy. So if you've agreed to any carve-outs, just be sure to review the contract language for those as well. And then next is MLR and MCF. So these terms are often used interchangeably in our industry. And in VBC contracts, it defines the percentage of revenue that your medical spend must be below. So as an example, if your MLR is set at 80% and the average revenue is $1,000 per member per month, the goal would be to manage your cost under 800 PMPM, or 80% of the 1,000. These thresholds are the thresholds that must be met to be able to receive shared savings payments. And also, if you're in downside risk arrangements, it's the threshold you want to stay below so that you don't have to pay anything back. So just keep in mind during negotiations that most health plans are required to spend 80 to 85% of plan revenue directly on patient care or efforts to improve quality of care. Shared savings and shared risk contracts will detail that percentage of shared savings or loss that will be paid to or from the provider group. These are percentages that are tied to those surpluses or the deficits above or below the thresholds we just talked about. These percentages can be tied to quality metrics or utilization metrics, and the percentages may be a moving target depending on how many of those metrics you meet. And then for deficit carry forward, if the contract is an upside only shared savings contract, the contract may stipulate that any deficit amount will be carried forward to the next performance year. And in my experience, we actually had a shared savings contract that had a deficit carry forward stipulation. And it was a contract that was really very frustrating to manage. And it was something that we wound up not putting a lot of focus on, because we felt as if we could never kind of get out from underneath that deficit. So luckily that contract was up for renewal, and we were able to negotiate that the payer wiped the slate clean so that we could kind of just start off with a new contract. We had renewed energy towards that contract, and I think it did a lot for our relationship with the payer as well. And lastly, I'm just going to mention evergreen contracts. So if you're in a contract, an evergreen contract that auto renews, just be sure that you are reviewing the contract terms and you're addressing any concerns that you have before that renewal. And if you're operating on a contract that's more than 5 years old, it's probably past time to take a close look at the terms and consider asking for a new contract. Logan, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, one thing that's tremendously kind of front of mind right now because of the time of the year is, excuse me, reinsurance or stop loss. I think, there's a lot of different ways that you could administer a stop loss or reinsurance policy. Some plans, prefer that you do it internally within their service fund. Others allow you to go external and kind of go get your own policy. Mm-hmm. I think what makes it tremendously difficult is you're basing your trends and your stop loss thresholds and premiums on kind of an incomplete annual data set. So right now we're actually going through renegotiations for our stop loss or reinsurance thresholds, but we don't really quite have a full picture of how the year will end. So it's really important to be able to look at the data, synthesize it, and then figure out the correct threshold that works for your company. By picking too low of a threshold, you leave a lot of financial opportunity on the table. But by picking too high of a threshold, you can expose yourself to a lot of risk. So it's really important to get your arms around the thresholds, figure out what works for your population, and how risk or risk adverse you are for the calendar year.
Thanks, Logan. That is definitely something that's really important to take in consideration. Okay, so we're going to do one last poll question. I'm going to turn it over to Garrett for this.
Okay, so this last poll question is: my organization is prepared to manage value-based contracts with downside risk. This is a select one, and again, this is anonymous. Agree, somewhat agree, somewhat disagree, or disagree. So we'll let the results come in here. Still got people answering. And this will give you also, hopefully, will give you some confidence in terms of where you guys stand among what else is going on in the space and the challenges others are facing. So, and we'll show the results here in just a second. I think most of the answers are in. So we're going to close it down in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And I'm going to go ahead and close it out, and then I will share the results. Okay. All right. Are you able to see the results?
Yes. My organization is prepared to manage VBC contracts with downside risk, and there's about 54% that say somewhat agree and somewhat disagree. So I think this is pretty close to what I would expect. I would expect a pretty high percentage in that somewhat agree based on those that are in the downside risk or capitated arrangements. So yeah. But there's still a little bit of room to grow, right?
It's really awesome to see, individuals kind of understand where they are and kind of be transparent with themselves and understanding kind of where they are on their value-based care journey. I think we've seen countless entities kind of jump into downside risk without really understanding the implications. So it's nice to see that there is kind of some distribution across all 4 of these answers, because it just shows that, they understand the health of the organization. They know where they need to get in order to do, downside risk and really get their arms around the entire population. So I think it's really, they're promising results. They're definitely promising results.
I agree. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about quality and performance metrics. This is going to be the last component that we'll discuss today. Most VBC contracts are going to contain metrics tied to quality of care utilization, and these metrics are going to be the basis for pay-for-performance contracts. And as I mentioned earlier, most shared savings contracts are tied to some sort of achievement or of quality or performance metrics. So consideration should be given to how well the metrics align to your group's internal initiatives. So oftentimes, provider organizations are managing multiple VBC contracts. So being able to focus on a smaller group, like 5 to 8 key metrics across contracts, is really beneficial. And this will help to keep your organization aligned to your mission and reduce some provider abrasion as well. And so for measure weights, higher weighted measures like medication adherence measures can have really significant impacts on your overall contract success. So it's important to understand your past performance in these areas and know if the given thresholds are reasonable for you. And measure targets and thresholds. Contracts will define those performance targets or thresholds and define the methodology that's used to calculate them. So for example, Medicare Advantage contracts utilize CMS star measures and thresholds, whereas commercial contracts can vary. And oftentimes with commercial contracts, the methodology is slightly more complicated, and it may use like a year-over-year performance or compare performance to a peer group. With MA and Medicaid measures, those thresholds are pretty straightforward and it's standardized. They're published and available. But if you find commercial measures to be complicated, just make sure that you receive examples of the calculations and that you address any concerns before you sign your contract. Logan, what is your experience with quality metrics?
Yeah, I think it's been tricky in recent years because of the new measures that have been rolled out, particularly around patient surveys. I think it's really important within your contract to understand the financial implications and how some of these metrics are operationalized. Sometimes it's as a result of a HEDIS bonus, depending on your risk structure, maybe it's just expected. We've also seen some instances where your quality score actually dictates your percentage of premium. So I think when you're creating your contract and looking at the metrics that are basically given to you by the payer, it's important to understand the meaning and what it's going to take to get that done, but also making sure that the thresholds are realistic and reasonable as you continue to enter, a full, partial, or global risk setting.
I totally agree. And I know as we talked as we were preparing for the webinar, we talked about how important it was for provider organizations to kind of come to the table and knowing what their experience is in some of these measures, right? It's really important. I have seen payers sometimes will provide some type of support in this area. So they may provide like a care coordination payment, maybe technology, and sometimes even staffing for quality metrics. So just kind of keep that in mind as well when you're negotiating your contract. All right, so let's go ahead and go to the last slide, which is our key takeaways. So it was really hard for me to kind of pick just a couple of key takeaways to reiterate here. So I've listed them all out here, but I do want to make sure that I am highlighting a few of those and really definitely around data. So for me, just be prepared to share and manage contract data. Ensure that the responsibilities are clear, like who is responsible for delivering what data, how data will be delivered, and if any support will be provided. And then ensure the type of data like quality, utilization, full claims, and the frequency that you want to receive it is addressed. And then just carefully review what is included or excluded from revenue and costs and address any of those concerns up front. And then that is it. Logan, did you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I think back to the data and to reference some of the polling answers that we received around, the preparedness for downside risk. I think that's why the data is so important. I think being honest with yourself and your organization of where you stand today in terms of, financial prowess around, the various implications of downside risk. I think having the data and being able to trend it over a longer period than, a year or a couple months will really help you make that decision to jump into a more aggressive risk strategy. And without doing that, it's not a pragmatic way, and you can wind up, in a bad position. So I think to your point, data is kind of key here, and understanding the data is absolutely a necessity.
Thanks, Logan. I agree. All right, well, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So having a technology partner can be the key to success in a VBC contract. I personally found that out working in at the provider organization, and it was something that was really important to me. So if you need support, find out if we're a good fit for you. The thing that I love about DataLink is that we have technology that supports the full scope and spectrum of a VBC contract. So I'm also going to give a special shout out to my team. We have a team of industry experts that provide training and ongoing support and engagement to our customers and the users of our platform. And we're like an extension of our client staff. We provide support for providers who are working on quality and risk adjustment. And if you would like some assistance reviewing VBC contracts, we have some members who are have strong contracting experience as well.
And one point to add, and as an operator and also a user of DataLink, I think having a solution that can manage your quality and kind of pop health solutions, as well as your contract administration and the financial implications, the various contracts on top of the service funds, it's extremely powerful. And there's often times that we may not know which direction to go in, and we're able to leverage kind of the value-based care team at DataLink. So definitely appreciate everything that you guys have done for the organization.
Thanks, Logan. And I want to thank you for being on the webinar today, because I really thank you for your partnership with us and as a client, and also just today and developing this webinar. So thank you for just bringing all of your knowledge and your skills to this call.
Happy to be here.
All right. Well, Garrett, do we have any questions?
All right, yes, we actually do have a few questions that came in. If you do have a question for either of our speakers, go ahead and submit it now using your control module. There's a place for questions on there, which is different than the chat. We're not going to be, let's see, a couple raised hands or whatever, but we won't be able to call on it like that. But go ahead and submit your question. And if we don't get to yours, we'll get to you through email later on. So first question is this, and again, in no particular order, where do I start if I'm new to value-based care contracts? Pretty broad.
Do you want me to start, or Logan, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, we've scaled pretty rapidly in the last couple of years. So I think we were at, 3 or 4 locations just in 2018. And obviously we jumped in kind of head first and definitely made some mistakes in the process. I think kind of everything that we talked about everything starts with the contract, right? So having a really deep understanding of the various implications, whether it's patient attribution, some of the financial metrics, the quality aspects. I think it's important to really understand the contract that you're going to be held to before you kind of get into, the operations of the contract.
Yeah, and I would say that for us, we started kind of with pay for performance, and that's usually that escalation, right? So just being able to kind of, if you're not doing any value-based care contracts and you're offered just a pay for performance contract, I think it's good to jump in and get started. There's not really a downside to that. And technically, there's not really a downside to doing a shared savings contract as well. And so just jumping into those contracts and getting some experience really helps you to start preparing for future risk contracts, which we all know, we're being told are coming. We believe it's happening in the industry. And along with that, you're going to start to have that relationship with the payer where you're going to start to be getting more and more data as well. And that then is going to help prepare you to know what kind of data you're getting in and what you need to manage.
Great. Okay. Next question is we receive files from multiple payers. What is the best way to manage all of this data?
I'll tell you, it's a tricky process. I mean, I think right now we do business with 7 or 8 payers, and everyone has their own portal. Some have SFTPs. So I think per the polls, right, having some type of hybrid gatekeeper, whether it's, an internal team in conjunction with a third-party vendor, which is kind of our model, it's extremely powerful. We designate a point person on both, the vendor side and internally to make sure that we're getting those files on a monthly basis, because some of these files are iterative, and if you don't pull them that month, they disappear. So it's increasingly important to make sure that you're pulling those on a monthly basis and you have a schedule of when each one of the payers drop the files.
Yeah, I would agree. When I think I already mentioned that, when I was at the prior organization, we were receiving files through FTP sites for multiple payers. And one of the things that's, really interesting is that the data sometimes can be very different, what you're getting, and even just like how they're structured within the file, right, can be very different as well. And so I think it's good to have some expertise within your team, but also for us, it was a priority for us to find a partner, a pop health partner that really could take in, not just quality and utilization metrics, but be able to actually work with the finances as well for us.
Great. Okay, next question here is, in regard to MLR or MCF, we have a Medicare Advantage payer who is trying to include dental in the cost of care. The payer includes dental benefits in their MA plan, but my healthcare plan or my healthcare system doesn't even provide dental care. Is this something we can fight with the payer?
So, go ahead.
No, it's funny. I was just having this conversation today. I think, as premiums increase and the documentation strategies increase, the amount of funding that these payers have to put back into benefits is increasing, and it's increasing on an annual basis. I think if you are a true total cost of care model, whether it's partial or, global or full, they can kind of, whatever medical expense that they want to put into that, bucket, they technically can. I mean, they're the ones that are creating the benefit design. They're the ones that are developing kind of the in-network capitation. So I totally feel the pain on that. I think sometimes, we feel that, there's aggressive benefits that get rolled out, but it's something that you have to roll with the punches. And I think it provides opportunity for savings in other locations. So you kind of have to be continuously on your game in order to combat any kind of increased benefit designs in terms of, lowering the overall cost associated with patient care.
Yeah, and I think my comment on that would be, I would just ensure that I was reviewing what was also going to be included in the revenue as well, right? So I would look at, is it just going to be the CMS PMPM, or is it going to be also that patient portion as well of their premiums?
Yeah, good response. Okay, next question here is, are there risk-bearing entities that we could pass through with since we already have a robust pop health team? Is that something DataLink provides?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Are there risk-bearing
Let me
entities?
see if I can read this again here. Are there risk-bearing entities that we could pass through with since we already have a robust pop health team? Is this something that DataLink provides?
Well, I think maybe the question, like, you guys are good from a technology standpoint. You have the capabilities to administer these contracts, and you have a robust reporting system. I think how do you go and get that first risk contract, and then how do you get the patient attribution? Kelly, I think that's something that you guys have helped me with, from speaking from personal experience. I think she would probably be the person to talk to, and maybe potentially collaborating and delivering some of your already robust capabilities to existing provider groups.
Yeah, we definitely, please reach out. We definitely would love to talk to you and determine whether we would be a good fit.
Yeah, great. Next question here is, our providers are used to a pay for performance. How do we get them to transition to or buy into the concept of downside risk of value-based care?
Logan, I'm going to let you start with that because I know you're currently doing that. So.
No, I think, we've entered some new markets that were relatively new to value-based care in general. And, downside risk is kind of the last step in the overall risk arrangement. I think it's important to provide the data, the opportunity, if you really get your arms around, the entire ecosystem of kind of a global capitated and including downside risk arrangement, what you can do for your patients. Because I think when you're managing costs extremely well and you have additional funds that you can put back into your provider organization to staff for, more comprehensive care coordination, other services like transportation, it builds out a really good ecosystem and improves patient care. So I think what we like to do is we structure everything in terms of how this is going to benefit the patient. And I think when it's done in a way that you can prove with the data, it's a really easy buy-in.
Yeah, and I will add that I think being able to share with your organization that you have a good risk mitigation strategy as well is important, like making sure that, you can share that you have some modeling that you've done in order to know what kind of risk you're looking at, that you are prepared with your reinsurance. And so I think that's important as well to share within your organization. But, with downside risk comes upside opportunity as well. And so being able to highlight that is important.
Well, one more quick point on that. I think it's definitely important to have the workflows ironed out as well, because there are a lot of implications. You've got to make sure that you're documenting appropriately, you're mitigating risk, you're providing services to the patient to ultimately improve outcomes and lower cost. And then having the ability to manage and track all that workflow is definitely important. I think that's a huge aspect, to getting buy-in, saying that, hey, here's the game plan. We're not going to be based off spreadsheets. It definitely goes a long way as well.
Yeah, great answer. Next question is, what impact will the introduction of G2211 have on your anticipated savings / bonuses next year?
What was the last piece?
And this may be, okay, so what impact will the introduction of G2211 will have on your anticipated savings / bonus next year? That may be a deeper dive that we need to get back to you through email if you guys don't have that at the top of your head.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a CPT, I'm not entirely familiar with that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not sure if they're referencing the risk adjustment changes or if they're, so we'll just have to get back to them.
Oh, they reference that's a code, is the G20. So yeah, that would be something that we could get back to you
Okay.
with. So, well, that one was a little bit of a doozy to end on here, but that was actually all, all the time that we have.
I need some of my coding experts from my team to be on the call right now. They're probably
They're
raising
yelling at
their
the
hands right
screen.
now to answer.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. But no, thank you both so much for a fantastic presentation today. This was really informative. If you do, by the way, have a question that you weren't able to ask or you're still formulating for our speakers today, please go ahead and submit it now, and someone will reach out to you through email later. As we close out here, I wanted to encourage you to head over to vbcexhibithall.com, and what you'll see when you get there, and actually you can follow the link in the slides, is you can check out the DataLink virtual exhibit booth there, and there's a lot of really cool resources here to pull from. There's a lot of information here about DataLink and what they're doing and how they can help. So please check it out. It's a really cool thing, and there's a lot of great information there. And of course, you can reach out to the team from there. And then finally, if you would like to contact our speakers today, or reach out to the DataLink team, feel free to do so. Their information is here on this final slide, or you can reach out to me and I'm happy to facilitate an introduction for you if that is easier. But again, I wanted to extend a thank you to both you, Logan and Kelly. Thank you so much for this, and thank you for joining us. To the audience here, we know there's a lot vying for your attention and competing these days, so really appreciate you spending your afternoon with us. Hope you join us on the next one. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.